Okay, we're recording. We are beginning.
Hey.
So, okay, welcome everyone. This is the second meeting. This is our second monthly meeting. We're going to continue doing these once a month. So hopefully we can continue to build attendance as we go along, and hopefully these are useful to folks. That's the main purpose, is to make them useful to the EnviroDIY monitoring station users. Okay, so this is just a reminder here about what the deal is with these meetings. So this is a time for anyone working with EnviroDIY monitoring stations in the Delaware River Basin to check in with Stroud, ask questions of the group, bring up issues, network, and learn. Attendees are going to be folks who are working directly in the Delaware River Watershed Initiative under William Penn Foundation funds, but also groups that are just working in the Delaware Basin but are not specifically associated with DRWI. Okay, so we're interested in supporting all of those different folks. And mentioning DRWI, Stroud Center is able to do this support to groups across the Delaware Basin with these stations via the Delaware River Watershed Initiative funds, as well as the Consortium for Scientific Advancement Assistance to Watersheds, or CSAW. Okay, so Delaware River Watershed Initiative, feel free to go to this website, 4 States, 1 Source, to kind of get some background on that. So goals for these meetings: simply a time and space to check in, ask questions, report issues, network, learn, as I said before. Some of the specific topics and sections that we have are a time for station owners and managers to communicate about their individual stations. Mike Bullard is going to be talking today about the Pickering Creek watershed. We're also going to have time to learn about technical and ecological issues in the focus topic of the month. And then we're going to provide general updates from the Stroud Center. And again, just to mention, all of this ultimately is just to support the gathering of good data and using it purposefully. Okay, so Zoom, we're recording right now. We're going to turn off the recording for the questions section, just, with the idea that maybe that just makes people feel a little more free to just have open conversation. So, and if everyone can just have their speakers muted right now, that would be good. But please, if there's any technical issues, feel free to chime in as needed, okay? So again, we probably won't show this every week, but just for the first, or every month, but just for the first couple, we'll introduce the facilitators. So myself, Rachel Johnson, Krista Reeves, and Shannon are the Stroud folks, and then Carol Armstrong and George Seeds, Master Watershed Stewards that are part of the Stroud SIT-SCI team. This is our sort of core group of folks that are facilitating and organizing these meetings. Okay, so again.
Chris, question, how come Krista looks like a mushroom?
She is driving right now, Jim. She is just listening in, so she doesn't have her video on. That's why.
Oh, okay.
So just to review again, just the basics of these meetings. They're every third Thursday of the month, 2:30 to 3:30. The Zoom link will remain the same, so you can just store that for your records. But I will continue to send a reminder email 1 week prior to each month's meeting. And then, or 1 week prior to each month's meeting, and then I think I'll send a morning reminder like I did today as well. And just to emphasize that, please, owners and managers, please communicate these meetings to your volunteers and others that would be interested in attending. Just let them know that they're absolutely welcome to attend and should attend if at all possible. Okay, again, these meetings are being recorded. You can find them here. The meeting from August last month is currently posted here, and it's on, and you can link to the YouTube recording via this link here. Okay. So this is our general format, same as last month, with the exception of we've introduced a topic, fail of the month. So we're kind of just going to acknowledge that there's a lot of mistakes that happen, and we learn from it. So our fail of the month this month is staff gauges, staff gauge mortality. Okay. So here's our agenda for today. This is me now. Then Mike Bullard is going to talk about the Pickering Creek watershed, connecting observed sediment loads with sediment sources. And then Shannon is going to talk about depth issues with the CTD sensor. And then we're going to have open discussion. I'm going to introduce the fail of the month staff gauge mortality, and that's going to take us to a new QC method that we've been using. Paul Wilson started this, and we're kind of doing it across the board now. And just again to revisit this perspective from Stroud in terms of support, we continue to have as our primary goal to support the station owners and managers and volunteers in maintaining the stations and using them for their own purposes. And then the secondary goal is to begin analyzing the basin-wide data set. One thing to bring up, I'm going to get into Stroud Center updates. I don't think Jody Carrara is on the call today. She may be on one of those other meetings I mentioned, but one of her volunteers with the South Jersey Land and Water Trust, who had really stepped up recently in keeping their station functioning nicely and asking questions and reporting in about issues, was William Lemmerman. And he recently passed very suddenly. I believe it was a heart attack, young man, I think just in his early 60s. And so just wanted to let folks know about that. Just wanted to, let it known that we were thankful for his support and just wish his family well and all. More Stroud updates. Broad scale analysis, I mentioned that earlier. We are continuing with that in the Watershed Congress presentation on September 23rd next week. It's 1:30 to 2:30. Spatiotemporal patterns of stream conductivity and temperature in the Delaware Basin. Deanna, Mark, and I are going to be presenting that information. And then one other update here. I think most folks know this, but just to be clear about it, 2G is being phased out by the end of 2020. So we pretty much have to upgrade all the stations to 4G if station owners want them to continue to be online. So Shannon and Rachel are going to be doing that with approval from station owners. They're already doing it, and we'll continue that till the end of the year. 2G, this is what your 2G situation looks like. This is 4G. You can also check and see if your station is 2G or 4G right now via Monitor My Watershed. So you look at the % full scale readout on Monitor, and you look under the sensor spot here. So if it says SODAC GPRSB, that means it's 2G. If it says DigiXB3 cellular LTE Cat 1, it means it's 4G. Now, Shannon noted today that there's a few that have been upgraded to 4G but have not been changed on Monitor. So there may be a few. I think, Shannon, you said Francis maybe was one of those with his Primrose stations. But regardless, those will be updated soon on Monitor. Okay, but please be in touch if you have any concerns about upgrades or have any timing issues with that. Okay, so any questions before we move on to Mike Bullard's presentation?
I guess I have a question on the 4G as the owners. Who's paying for them? I assume
Stroud is able to pay for that. Stroud is able to pay for those upgrades, Jim.
Oh, great. Well, I have like 6 of my low-cost stations.
That's another question. That's another story, Jim. I don't know about that because it's sort of a standard protocol that we're using for the upgrade on 4G for the standard EnviroDIY station. I'd say that's a good side conversation maybe to have outside of this meeting in terms of how to upgrade your low-cost sensors. But hopefully that certainly is something that would be good to do because you've got a lot of good data coming in there from across the Great Marsh.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Anything else? Okay. All right, we are at 2:41. We're right on track. Great. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. And Mike Bullard, if you can share your screen and begin your presentation. Boy, and I see we've got 29 people on at this point, so that's great.
Okay.
Excellent.
Share screen. Hang on a second. It's up here. Okay, share screen and share that one. Share. Good afternoon, everybody. David has challenged me to try and do something with the turbidity data in terms of getting some sediment numbers out of it. Let me start this timer. Pickering Creek is a beautiful creek, but we have some problems. Everybody can hear me, right? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Mike.
Okay, great.
Yes.
Beautiful creek, but we have some problems. This is what I call a stranded tree, and we have a lot of them. The banks in some places are moving at almost a foot per year, half a foot commonly. And so we've got sediment sources, both stream bank sediment sources, and we've got on-land sediment sources. And the sediment's being generated, and we're seeing that sediment pass 4 mayfly stations that are in, let's see if that works. Click, okay. There are currently 4 mayfly stations in the Pickering. Previous slide is pretty much right in the middle, but we're below SL135 and above SL138. And we're going to be processing the sediment data the turbidity data at the outlet of SL138. Again, this is a nice creek. Brook trout do well in there. This is a picture from not too far above SL138. Actually, there's a good healthy trout population in there, and several of the stream are wild trout. But again, we have some serious issues with stormwater coming through the stream. We're all familiar with this. The top graph is showing us what the raw mayfly data looks like. First thing I would do is reprocess that into hourly intervals. And you also need to make sure that there's no gaps in there because you're going to start comparing this with, say, other mayfly data or other types of data. You want your time series to be start and go all the way through without missing a single hour. So the bottom has been averaged and processed a little bit. We also need to bring in some outside data. The mayfly is seeing a very specific set of data that's, you are seeing that screen, okay, sorry. The mayfly is seeing a very specific set of in-stream data, but there's an awful lot of other data that we have outside the stream, which is being collected by radar, by satellites, by weather stations, and we have some high resolution products that are available that we can also leverage in trying to understand what's happening at that station. In this example, I am going to use stormwater as a filter to clean up the turbidity data. We know a lot of that turbidity data is just fouling, or the stuff is collected in front of the sensor and it's causing a reflection. And we don't want to look at that data. So if we have a modeled daily runoff, then we can use that runoff as to signal when we want to keep the turbidity data. The rest of the time we just want to discard it. So the top graph here is showing we could either look at precipitation, would be another way to approach this. Blue is precipitation in the watershed. The orange, which is hard to see here, these are runoff events, and these are, the model is producing a daily time step, so these look a little strange, but they're daily. We apply that filter, And the previous, these are turbidity data that's going to get dropped because, or for example, this, because there's no stormwater happening at that point. And it does look like somebody came in and cleaned the sensor at this point. This all looks familiar at this point. So again, comparison, we take the raw data up top, we'll look at the bottom, and we've made a start in terms of processing, 100,000 data points into something that looks like it makes a little more sense. The next step, if we're going to try and get sediment from this turbidity data, is we also need flow. So we're going to multiply that flow during that particular hour, or better yet, during a shorter interval, times the concentration. And we're just going to get that concentration by looking at the turbidity, multiplying it by 2. But in real life, we want to use that rating curve that you guys are working on developing, and it's probably not a linear relationship. But this is going to get us through this. So depth is in orange, and then, so I'm going to develop a rating curve for SL138 quickly here. We have model flow and we have observed depth. We go ahead and take that data again, looking at this bottom chart. The one is model flow and the other one is sensor depth. And this scatter plot is that same data. And we've built a rating curve. And I have 4 minutes left. That rating curve, we're going to plug that back in to that hourly data. And now we have created an hourly time series for SL138 in terms of flow. And if you'll remember, previously we had looked at developing an hourly time series for turbidity. Multiply those two together, and we're going to see sediment delivery in kilograms per hour. Works out to about 8,000 metric tons per year. This is in the ballpark of where it should be. There's all sorts of caveats in here, but what I'm trying to do is connect up what the sensor is seeing to what we're seeing at some of these sites. And I have to switch screens here and get to, give me a second. Oh, that was clever. Hang on. Can everyone see, we should have a map showing. David,
yes.
Stop me. Can you see this map?
Yep, got it, Mike.
Okay, so that sensor station is located, the one we're looking at is located right here currently. We look at historical data for this site, for example, and this is from 1975 imagery. And what that yellow is showing is erosion losses, and what the blue is showing is deposition. So we have current data in terms of LiDAR information, and then we have historical data. We look at another site. This is a former ice dam. So in 1958, it looked like this. Zoom in. So there's the stream channel in 1958. In 2014, it looks like this. And the losses at this site are, works out to about 600 tons per year, metric tons, just based on a stream bank lateral change versus an average depth of about 2 meters. So that's about, again, it's in the right ballpark. And these numbers are consistent with the USGS measurements that they're doing for sediment over in the French Creek. Let me get back to my PowerPoint. See if this works. From the current slides. And Dave, can you see that again?
Yep, got it, Mike.
Okay, so here we are back at Ice Dam. These are UAV data that I'm collecting. And there's really very impressive amounts of erosion going on here. This particular feature is moving about 1 foot per year. And all this sediment dates from after the establishment of the ice dam, which would have been up 1890, I think. So just go back and look at this again. So what I went through was a quick process of looking at how we would clean up the turbidity data, do a simple change it over into total suspended solids milligram per liter, then take that concentration, multiply it times observed flow, and get a initial look at the amount of sediments moving past this station. And there's 3 more stations in the Pickering that I'm working on. And this is SL113, and as it's back in there, and I'm always amazed to find that these stations are still there after these heavy storms that we've been having. Okay. And
You through, Mike?
I am through.
All right. Okay. Let me share my screen briefly. Okay. We will move on now to Shannon, who is going to present some information on technical issues with the pressure transducer, i.e. depth, within the CTD sensor. And just to give credit to Rachel, she was the main preparer of the presentation, and Shannon is going to present the information. So I will stop share and pass it on to Shannon to share her screen.
All right, hi everybody. Let me share my presentation. All right, is that looking okay, Dave?
Looks good, Shannon.
All right, good. So let's see. All right. I think everybody here has everybody here should have one of these CTD sensors on their station. Last month, Rachel talked about the turbidity sensors, and I think there may be a few out there who, if your stream was too shallow or there were some other issues, you may not have had a turbidity sensor, but I think just about every station we deploy in a river or a creek has one of these CTD sensors on it. So you should already be familiar with the basic, function of the sensor, but we just thought we'd talk a little bit about one specific part of it today, which is just the depth side of things. The sensor is made by, it used to be called Decagon, which was the name of the company, and now they're called the Meter Group when they merged with another company. So they have 2 part numbers. One is called a CTD10, and other times it's called a Hydros 21. So that's why you'll see it referred to by 2 different names, but it's the exact same sensor. So the pressure transducer portion of the CTD sensor is a small ceramic disc that's located inside the body of this solid piece of plastic. And there's the, I took a saw to one of our damaged CTD sensors and cut off half of the little plastic shroud that covers the outside so that you could actually see the inside of it a little better. But it's a little ceramic disc that's about maybe the size of a dime, and it's extremely fragile. If you poke it really hard with a stick, it will break because it's made of ceramic. But inside that ceramic are little tiny wires that when pressure is pushed onto the ceramic, they measure the amount of force, and it's sensitive enough to measure 1 millimeter changes in water depth. So it's extremely sensitive, but that also makes it very fragile and easy to break. This is a cross section if you were to actually cut one of these apart, which I have done also. It's a circuit board that's built into or coated with a solid piece of epoxy or plastic type material, but inside it looks like that. And there's also a temperature sensor that's on that circuit board surrounded by this big hunk of plastic. And in one of our later sessions, Dave is going to talk, or someone else will be talking about the temperature side of things. But today we're just going to talk about the pressure side. Also in this photo, you can see those 4 silver screws. Those are the screws that measure the conductivity of the water. And that'll be another topic of discussion later, but it's all right there in the same area. And over on the right-hand side of this picture, you see the diagram that shows the vent for the depth sensor. It's a small Gore-Tex sleeve. It's made of, it's a waterproof material that allows air to pass through it. And it's got a little bit of heat shrink on either side of it. And that allows the barometric pressure of the air around us to equalize, because if you don't have that, what happens is the sensor in the water is measuring the depth of the water, but you also have the depth of the pressure of the atmosphere pushing down on the water as well. So you need to subtract the air pressure from the total pressure of the water plus air, and then that gives you just the water. So if anything happens to damage that little white Gore-Tex sleeve or the cable itself, then that's when you're going to have some errors in your readings. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the side of the data that you guys see, which is looking at Monitor My Watershed and looking at the graph. So how do you know if your station is performing properly and that the depth readings are normal? In a small creek like Taylor Run, which is in Westchester, it's a very small creek that has fairly constant flow. This was from last December, shortly after we installed it. But you can see this is like about a 1-week period where it's a nice kind of fairly flat line with nothing exciting going on. On a larger creek, like this is the Pennypack at Paper Mill Bridge, you can see this was taken during August, late August and September of last year, I believe, yeah. Actually, no, this looks like 2018. The station's been out for more than a couple of years now. So on this station, you see there was a storm on, it looks like August 22nd to 23rd, and there was another storm kind of on September 1st. But there's also lots of other like wiggles in the lines. And if you were to zoom in on that and look at the data, you would see that it peaks at the same time every day, and there's kind of a valley at the same time every day. And this was during August. If you were to look at this same creek during December or January or February, during a week when there was no rain, you would have one of those flat lines. And so this, that type of shift in the depth like this is caused by usually by the evapotranspiration of the trees as they draw water out of the stream bed when they're doing their photosynthesis, and then the water goes back into the stream bed during the evenings. And so that causes the depth data to oscillate like that on a daily basis. So you might look at this and think that you have a problem with your sensor, but that's actually a very natural system that you're monitoring there. So this is a graph of that same Taylor Run small stream in July when there was a storm. The depth is normally around 250 millimeters. It goes up to over 1,000 millimeters. So we got over a meter of depth there. So if you've been to that stream, like if this was one of your streams, you know that it's not unusual for your water to go almost a meter deep there, because this was a fairly big flood event. So knowing what the maximum flood stage of your sensor is kind of important for being able to look at this graph and go, wow, that's a really big number, but I've been there and I know that the water is a meter deep, and that's a valid number. So we know that that's not a malfunction. This is another graph. The line is stretched out. It's a little bit longer, but this is on Angelica Creek, which is a bigger creek, and the time scale the peak is a little bit longer, so it was drawn out over a little bit longer time. And this one goes from around 200 millimeters to 1400 millimeters. But again, this is a bigger creek, and it's not unusual for the water to be that deep. So that's a valid number there also. And what's also good to look at after a storm like this is your starting depth about the same as what your ending depth is. So once all the water's kind of left the area and you've gone back to base flow conditions, you should be around the same depth that you were before the storm. This is during a storm event on the Schuylkill River. This is a much bigger system, so you've got a lot of unusual wavy things going on with the graph like this, but that's because of the storms, like small thunderstorms will affect different portions of the watershed. So you'll get different shape hydrographs depending on where the storms came in the watershed upstream of the station, and also just any tributaries that come in upstream that might have more rain than another. So there's all sorts of unusual shapes that will happen that you could look at this and say, wow, this doesn't look normal, but it could just be a lot of scattered thunderstorms. And another day where you had a complete line of storms that came through, you will get a totally different hydrograph. But again, that's not unusual to see strange things like this, but it looks like, you know, at the beginning of this graph, we started at 300 millimeters and we're ending about 200, 250. So that's, again, pretty normal because nothing has shifted unusually. So we're going to talk about a couple of things that will cause your data to look strange and indicate that there's a problem. One of these is obviously when you stop reading any data from your sensor at all. On Monitor My Watershed, you'll see it'll say -9999, indicating that the data logger has no connection to the sensor itself. And that usually happens when an animal, we've had beavers chew cables. I think Jim Moore's on the call. He's had several beavers chew cables before, but with squirrels and other rodents will eat the wires occasionally. And in the case of this one here, the photo on the right, it was apparently some local teenagers who were bored and decided to not only cut the cable in one location, but you can see they cut it in probably 10 or 12 places. So they just went to town with a pair of scissors or wire cutters and just cut the thing in a million pieces. So when that happens, you'll lose data altogether. What's harder to diagnose is when you start seeing, you still get data, but it's unusual data. And in the case of this graph here, the blue line is the water depth and the orange line is the water temperature. So you can see the water temperature it varies during the day. This is in July, so the water's warmer in the daytime and cooler at night. But you'll see that for this small stream that is only normally 250 millimeters deep, you start to see peaks of 400 or 500 or even up to 600 millimeters of depth during the evenings, or excuse me, during the daytime, that there's no way that there's going to be 600 millimeters of water every day at noon. So in the case of this, if you plot temperature and water depth at the same time on the same graph, you can see how everything lines up. And this is an indication that there's a problem internally with the circuit of the CTD sensor itself. And those sensors are temperature compensated, which means that the pressure of warm water at a certain depth will be different than the pressure of cold water at that same depth. So there's some calculations that go on inside the circuitry of the sensor to compensate for those changes in temperature. And if something happens to the pressure readings, those temperature readings will get superimposed onto the depth reading, and then you'll see where temperature and depth kind of match like this. So that indicates that there's an issue with the internal circuitry of the sensor, and there's nothing we can do about it because it's embedded in that solid piece of plastic. So this sensor just has to be replaced. Another issue that you'll see is on looks like July 11th probably, the depth, instead of being around 250 to 300 millimeters, it drops to -600 millimeters. So this could happen if your data logger or your sensor is buried in some mud and there's actually a bit of a suction effect. But that's only happened a very few times. Most of the time when this happens, it's either because of the sensor malfunctioning or if you get a nick in the cable itself. Remember how I said you have to have the atmospheric vent that travels through the airspace that's in the cable jacket. And if the cable jacket becomes punctured or scratched or bent, and it doesn't allow the air to transfer all the way down that entire 30-foot length of cable from the vent to the sensor, then you will end up with readings like this. So if you have strange negative readings, that's a definite indication that there's something wrong. And we usually can't, sometimes we've been able to fix it just by moving things around or poking around with it, but 99 times out of 100, when we've seen this sort of problem, it again requires a replacement sensor. So you can see at the end of this graph here on August 25th or 6th, Rachel went back and replaced the CTD with a new one, and the readings returned back to normal. Another one that is a bit unusual is if you see a really dramatic increase for absolutely no reason. So here you can see on June 1st, this is one of Francis' stations over at the Primrose Creek, where the station dropped to not quite zero, but then it increased really high up to around over 2 meters of water, and there's no way that 2 meters of water was going to be there. And then shortly after that, then the station started acting very strange in the kind of zero range, even though it was in water. But there were times where it would read some water, but the values, like we were getting things like -43 and other numbers that were not quite valid, and then going out and doing an in-person measurement with a ruler indicated that what we were seeing on the data logger was not the same as what we were seeing in real life. So again, this is a station that required a brand new sensor. And then one of the obvious things that's easy for anybody to go out and troubleshoot is after a big storm, if there's been a lot of debris and sediment, and what Mike was just talking about, of tons and tons of sediment moving down a stream, some of those pieces will be the exact right size for wedging in between the circuit board and the pressure measurement disc of the CTD sensor. And there's been a handful of times where I've gone out when we were getting very unusual pressure readings from a sensor, and it turned out that there was either a small stick or a rock or some other little piece of material that was wedged up in there. And you're able to get that out yourself if you've got like a very small item like a toothpick, or maybe the pokey end of a like a zip tie or something. If you've got something very fine that you can actually poke that item out from the other side, but you definitely don't want to poke it through. And if you push down on that white disc at all, you will break it. So I've been able to fix just about all of them that have had this issue, except for one where a rock got so wedged up in there that it actually cracked that ceramic. But that's an obvious thing that's easy to troubleshoot with just pulling the sensor out. And then the last thing we want to talk about is coming up here in the next few months. We're getting into cold weather season where we're going to start seeing a lot of, like the photo on the left, where you get a lot of ice covering the creek. I believe the station the picture on the left is one of Mike's stations there, 113 or 114, where you can see in the far left corner of the bottom left portion there's a red cable coming out of the water. So that's where that creek froze so solidly that there was ice down around the pressure transducer itself. And so you will actually see the pressure reading go extremely high, and you'll usually see the conductivity reading drop to zero at that time also, because the ice doesn't conduct like normal water. And so if you start seeing extremely unusual pressure readings at the same time, you see unusual conductivity readings, and also the internal temperature sensor on the CTD will be reading around 0 or 0.1. That indicates that your sensor is freezing. A lot of times, like the sensor on the right, it's not a problem if a little bit of ice forms at the top around the cable. That's not a problem. What happens is when the damage occurs, when the ice freezes down to where the actual ceramic portion of the sensor is. So if you know that your creek freezes a little bit on the top of the water, but never freezes solidly really deeply, you're probably okay. But if you know that there's a really big cold snap coming, and they're talking about like a week of extended cold freezing temperatures, and your station is in a fairly slow moving stream and your sensors are fairly shallow, then it's probably a good idea to just remove your sensors from the creek for that week or so, and put the sensors, don't just lay them on the ground because they'll get covered with ice and snow there, but maybe hang them from, like, just loop them around and hang them on the top of of your station or from a tree branch or something, just to keep them up off the ground. Your CTD sensor will not freeze or won't be damaged if it's just frozen in air. As long as there's not water around the disc, you're fine. So it's okay to hang your sensor station or your sensors out in the air for a few days in order to keep them from freezing. We've only had a handful of stations actually get damaged from being deeply frozen like that. Almost all of them have been able to survive having the ice either right around them or up on the top portion of the water. So just something to keep in mind as we are nearing the next little bit of cold weather. And then this ties into what Dave's going to talk about in just a minute, is that to double check that your sensors have survived a flood or freezing, or just they do tend to randomly fail for no reason, it's good to go out and take, this is a photo, this is actually an underwater photo here, where you hold the ruler up against the bottom portion of the CTD sensor and measure the depth of the water from the pressure disc to the water surface. And you enter this information into your QC data sheet. And then if you've got your staff gauge or the QC rebar depth that Dave's going to talk about in just a minute, then you can tie those measurements in and make sure that if you're going out and making a visit this week, that it matches the same readings you got last week or last month that you were there and did it. So if you start to see that the staff gauge or your rebar measurements are drastically different than your current pressure readings, then that indicates that you're having a problem with your pressure sensor, and you need to, number one, pull it out of the water, look at it, make sure there's no debris wedged into it, then check the cable and make sure that you don't see any nicks, cuts, or scrapes that have damaged the cable anywhere along the entire length going up the bank. Checking the little white vent next to where it enters the pelican case. And if you don't see anything obvious with any of that, then you can call us and let us know, and we'll have to diagnose what's going on. But a lot of the issues you can probably help troubleshoot by just looking at those things that I just mentioned. Do we have any other questions? We're going to have a big question and answer period at the end of this whole call here in just a little bit, but do we have any quick questions about the material that I just went over, or any of the slides that I just showed that relate just to the depth portion of a CTD sensor?
Yeah, I was going to comment on your beaver chew. I did write up a blog on how to prevent that with armored cable, and I put that on our stations, and no beaver have gotten at it. So if you've got beaver in the stream, it might be a good idea to think about shielding those cables with, it's in a blog that I wrote up, I guess a month or so ago, the details of that, but they work well for me, and we do have a lot of beavers. So just thought I'd point that out.
Shannon, this is Dave Yake. I'll ask a question for Marion. Do you have any experience in mounting the turbidity sensor above into the air above base flow? Since normally we don't worry about the base flow data, we're mostly interested in runoff. Will those sensors survive that? Have you run any tests on that kind of a concept?
I missed the first part of your question. What was that?
If you take the turbidity sensor, split that out, are you able to split that out from the package on the CTD?
Dave, you're asking about putting the CTD sensor in a position so that it's not underwater during base flow, correct?
Yeah, well, the turbidity portion.
Oh,
only.
just the turbidity portion.
Yes.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, my computer froze up, so my slides aren't, I can't see anybody or anything, I got to reboot. But yeah, you could potentially pull the turbidity portion away from the CTD portion, but if you've got ice forming down around your sensors, that's going to occlude the turbidity sensor, and you're not going to be able to see anything there. So there's not really a point in doing that. And then you also end up, by removing the CTD sensor from your bundle, it kind of changes the offset so that when you put it back in, your depth measurements aren't going to line up again, and it's just going to be a big mess. So unless you're really unless you think that there's going to be some turbidity data during that frozen event that you care about, the safest thing is just to pull everything out and wait till the ice is over. We've only had, in the 5-6 years we've been putting these stations out, there's only been like 2 or 3 events that were more than a couple of days of frozen temperature, like in February or March, where we had like a super cold event where it was like 4 or 5 days of deep freezing, and there was only 2 or 3 stations that we were concerned enough about that the ice could get down to it. So it's not a major problem, but I know stations like the Lapatcong one at SL120 and 113 and 114 with Mike's stations and a couple others that are a little bit shallow and very slow water. Those are ones that people should just think about maybe pulling it out, but again, only during a really deep freeze event. And if you're wondering, you could always just email us and say, hey, look at my station data on right now and look at the weather and tell me whether I should pull it out or not. And
yeah, I guess my question was more oriented toward some streams requiring fairly constant cleaning of the turbidity probe to make sure you're getting decent data, there's no debris and so on. And so one of the things that we're looking at is whether we mount the turbidity portion only, leave the rest of it in the stream, take the turbidity measurement and put it 1 inch or 2 inches above base flow, because what we're really interested is catching the early portions of a high flow runoff through the peak and then on the receding limb to measure the turbidity. And I don't know whether you had any data on that.
Yeah, you could do that. Again, we just advocate for putting the CTD as low in the water column as possible to prevent freezing. But yeah, you can't put the turbidity sensor too low or it starts to see the bottom of the stream bed. So that's why it's kind of a fine balance between how you do it. And if you want to separate them and put them in 2 separate spots, it's totally doable. It just means more installation hardware and more things in the water to catch debris and get snagged or whatever. So in most of the time, our streams are deep enough that we can kind of find the ideal location for both sensors. But if you've got a spot where you want to break it up and try that, go for it. There's no reason you can't. It's just we try to keep it simple and just only have 1 sensor bundle in most of our locations.
I was going to comment, I think Dave says an interesting idea, because our stream, the big problem is, algae just coats the lens. You almost have to clean it, wipe it every day to get reasonable results. So it's a constant battle, in our case with algae, obscuring this turbidity sensor.
All right.
Exactly, Jim. And that's what we're thinking about, as well as looking at other sensors besides turbidity and using absorbance as the infrared beam.
Well, give me an idea. I'm going to try it. I'll let you know if it works in our stream.
All right.
That sounds like a good plan. This is also something you guys could bring up in the EnviroDIY forum. But we should probably move on. Shannon, do you want to stop sharing?
I can't, so you'll have to take it away from me because my computer's locked up. I got to reboot.
Okay. Okay. Stop participants sharing. It's not even letting me do it either.
Shannon's computer's thinking too hard.
Okay, there we go. Okay, here we go. Yeah, Shannon's computer's thinking too hard. All right, so, okay, fail of the month, real quick. Everyone knows staff gauges that we've been putting out are vulnerable, especially in streams that get big storms, big powerful storms. It rips these things out, trashes them, debris accumulates, water comes through, bends the staff gauges, rips apart the staff gauge itself. So it's common. The hurricane really showed us again like how vulnerable these things are and really how ineffective they can be at times at serving their purpose of a stable depth reference. So what we've been doing is putting in, Shannon alluded to this, but we've been putting in this stream bottom rebar here. It seems to be more stable than a staff gauge because it's under the water and you drive it into the stream bed a ways down there. So you don't have that whole section above in which it's, you know, the water is hammering on it. Paul Wilson was the first one to try this. We've been testing it out and it really does seem to work. It's a good quality control cross-reference for if the CTD got ripped out or something like that, you still have this in here that you can put this back at the same depth. You don't get the on-site visual depth reference that you do with the staff gauge, but you get the most important part, which is the quality control stable depth reference, okay? So all you're doing here is you're measuring, you're driving this thing into the stream bottom so that it's stable, and you're just measuring from the top of this rebar to the water surface. And then you're comparing that to the depth. You're just going to substitute then this measurement for the staff gauge, and that's going to be your offset. So your offset is the distance from the top of the rebar to water surface minus the CTD depth. Okay, that offset should remain the same over time. You're just going to, when you fill this out on the data sheet, you're just going to substitute the distance from the top of the rebar to water surface for the staff gauge height, and you're just going to do the calculation the same for the offset. The only thing is we're still working with this data sheet, so you just want to make sure to note on the data sheet in the general comments or on the comment section on the back, you just want to note that the stream bottom rebar method was used instead of the staff gauge method. Okay, so just to finish up with this, oh, and also to mention, that rebar method is described in the manual now, okay? So you can reference the manual for a description of how to install and then how to do those measurements. So this is just this is Tom Bruce here. Tom is on the call today. Tom facilitated in a really efficient and organized way recently the Nature Conservancy stream stewards going out and putting these rebars in at 6 of their stations in First State National Historic Park. So I don't know if Tom, if you want to say anything in our questions period about that, feel free. I'm going to move on. But if anyone has any questions on Tom's approach to that, maybe we can bring it up in the questions period. So here we are in the questions period, and I think we're kind of running out of time. We're at 3:23 now. We'll go a little over. Obviously, this is being recorded, so if anyone has to you know, leave at 3:30, that's totally fine. You can reference the recording. I'm going to stop the recording right now, or pause the recording right now, so that we can have an open question period. So I'm going to pause. So please, someone, when we come back to conclusion, remind me to start recording again, but I'm going to pause recording and share my screen, and we will wrap things up here. So to conclude, our next meeting here is going to be, again, the 3rd Thursday of the month, which is in October. It's going to be October 15th, 2:30 to 3:30. Come on. Okay. Again, just to point out, just so that everyone is understanding this, please communicate this to, you know, anyone that's on your team that isn't here today. Every 3rd Thursday of the month, just mark your calendars. 2:30 to 3:30. The Zoom link will remain the same. Okay. Here's what we've got laid out here. Patty, I saw you're on the call today. I realized that you were scheduled for October. We should talk about whether you want to do it October or whether you want to do November. We're going to shift things around, but we've had so many people volunteering to present that we're already scheduled out to January. So, but Robert is going to be talking in next month about temperature monitoring and other such things. Darren is going to talk about his urban stream in the Darby Creek watershed. In December, Francis is going to be talking about primrose and quarry issues and sinkholes. And then in January, Juniper and Christine are going to be talking about something that I've been working with them on, which is building a template for watershed characterization based on the monitoring station data. And then I guess I'm going to be talking about water temperature in October, and then we're going to do conductivity presumably in November. But again, please be in touch if you or anyone you know would like to do a presentation on what you've got going with your local stations, or if you want to talk about do some sort of technical focus topic or ecological topic. Okay. Again, mentors are available right now for anyone that needs training, one-on-one type training. Carol and George are both available. Rachel is available, and then Krista, who's up more in the north, is available for folks working up in that region. Krista's in Bethlehem, PA, and so she has a little more access to some of the northern locations. If you know of anyone or any of you are interested in being a mentor, please be in touch about that as well. Again, just to point out, this website, we've got a lot of resources there. We organized it recently into these accordion drop-down folders because there's a lot of information there. These are actually going to be a little bit more reorganized to make it a little more consolidated. But so you might need to go in there and just kind of plunk around for a bit to get your bearings. But there's a lot of information in there. And then the online group, feel free to pose questions in there, bring up topics. That's just there for conversation. We've also reorganized that a little bit, and we're going to continue to reorganize it to make it a little more user-friendly. So that's where we are at. Please feel free to reach out to, oh wait, hold on. I wanted to keep that up, but get out of, there we go. We are at 3:37. Any questions at this point from anyone?
David?
Yes.
This is Tom. I just wanted to let everybody know, in First State, we just went through the process of converting to rebar at all of our sensor stations, and we removed all the staff gauges. So if anybody has any questions about that process, we learned a lot from converting all 6 of our locations. So I'm available for that if anybody needs any help.
That's great to know, Tom. I appreciate you offering that up. And if anyone needs Tom's contact information, you can get that through any of the Stroud folks, me, or you could contact Kim Hatchadorian, who's on this call as well, if she's the stewards organizer, Matrix Services stewards organizer. So thanks everyone. Any final thoughts, questions, any thoughts or anything from the SITSI team? George, Carol, Rachel, Shannon, Krista? No?
Nope.
Any final questions from attendees?
Mike, I'm going to send you some background information of work that we're doing on Valley Creek. It might be applicable to what you're looking at there, so I'll send it to you on the side.
Thank you.
Yeah,
They've got beavers in Valley Creek now too.
Oh, okay, good. Got them all over the place. Good.
One thing I just want to mention before we close here, please, if anything occurred to you during this meeting that would be useful to adjust or add, please, reach out to me or Shannon or Rachel, and just let us know what you're thinking. We're, we kind of have the freedom to just adjust this according to what folks really need and want to see and learn. So please just absolutely feel free to be in touch, with any suggestions for these meetings or just general questions or issues that you're running into. Okay. So I guess we did fairly well with keeping it to about an hour. It's 3:40. That's not too bad.
Hell, that's on time for you, Dave.
Yeah, these things tend to go long. Well, it's good though. People have a lot of good questions, and there's a lot of interesting topics. So thanks everyone, and feel free to be in touch, and everyone take care and be safe out there, all right?
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye all.
Bye.
Thanks.